Hi, Peter Linneman here. Trying not to overload you or to keep repeating myself. So I'm trying to deliver relatively new information on a regular but not overloading basis. We appreciate you thinking about us and staying in touch, and we hope that we get to all work together on the other side of this. So I thought I'd pull together a few thoughts as we sit here on March 28 with a quiet moment, able to reflect a bit. First, though, I'm really not interested in all the political we should have, we could have, we ought to. No one is ever prepared for such emergencies in life. It's like when a fire occurs in your home. You should have, could have, might have. The real issue is, what are you doing as it happens? And I think everyone is trying the best they can to make the best of it. This week saw, as I expected, the new unemployment claim numbers skyrocketed to 3.6 million, unprecedented in 1 week. And you have to remember that was actually for the previous week. And I'm expecting that what you're going to see this Thursday come out, which will be reflecting the week that ended this past Wednesday. So there's a lag. It's not much of a lag, but it's a lag in the data. I'm expecting that it'll be close to 10 million new unemployment claims. And of course, basically no one got hired in that time period. And in fact, the bill that was just passed to help people as they lose jobs will actually, I think, make it even higher the subsequent week, because a lot of employers who are trying to help their employees out and are wondering what to do with this new assistance basically are going to say, with that new assistance, I'm going to cut the cord a week or two sooner than I otherwise would have. So let's just review the math. We started the second week of March essentially with a 3.5% unemployment rate and 5.8 million people employed. And we've probably, as I sit here today, have added close to 14 million to that number. So we're probably around 20 million unemployed as I sit here this Saturday. We won't know the actual number for some time because the data lags, but I'm guessing we're sitting around 20 million unemployed. That means the number of employed would have gone from 156 million at the end of the first week of March down to about 136 million employed as I sit here on March 28, 3 weeks later. That's a pretty staggering jump, and will obviously show itself in the unemployment rate skyrocketing notably. And so I'm guessing the unemployment rate as we sit here is on the magnitude of 12%. And will get worse, notably in the next week or two. To the extent it's not that bad, it's only because people are still technically employed, or they haven't filed or been asked if they're unemployed yet. I had two thoughts this week. Like a lot of you, I'm kind of trying to organize a thought for the day. One thought was, I wonder what the reaction around the world would have been to the outbreak if the first country it happened in had not happened to be China. And the reason I say that is China is clearly a very authoritarian country. We know that they're willing to lock up millions of their citizens, the Uyghurs, in, quote, education centers, end quote. And they're willing to suppress all kinds of communication. And they decided to shut down. I'm not saying right or wrong, they just did. And therefore set a template of that's what one should do. If you look at the death rate in the province where Wuhan was, the death rate turned out to be about 1 in 20,000 residents. Not 1 in 20,000 that got the disease, but about 1 in 20,000 residents. That's massively lower than the 1 to 4% numbers that, many have bandied about. The Imperial College study got tremendous play, indicating that the death rates would be on the order of 1 to 4%. That study has backtracked a bit, saying, gee, first of all, some of the steps taken have reduced the spread rate, but also, more importantly, more people probably had the disease than we knew, and therefore the death rates are far lower than we thought because many fewer actually died that had it. Not just a technicality. It's not surprising the immunology community doesn't know the real results yet because you're only working on a couple of months of data. So it's very challenging. But when you look at the death rate on the cruise ship where you had ideal conditions for it to grow and the ideal host in elderly citizens, I think that was a 1% death rate, and the conditions couldn't have been much better for the disease to thrive than under that. So everyone is scrambling around and no one knows. And the stock market has no idea what to do. And there's this old saying that when somebody rich does something odd, they're eccentric. And when somebody poor does something odd, they're crazy. And all I can say is I'm a lot less eccentric today than I was 3 weeks ago. And I'm hoping some of my eccentricity returns. Another thought I had a couple of days ago is, and I asked my friend Mike Roizen out at Cleveland Clinic, who's head of wellness out there, suppose we knew that we were not going to have a vaccination and we were not going to have an effective treatment for this 20 years from now. What would we do? And I think economically it's clear that if we knew that, we would not shut down. Of course, we don't know that, and we hope quite the opposite. But if we knew that 20 years from now we've made no medical progress, I think that we'd say we've got to live with it, and we wouldn't have shut down the economy. We might have washed our hands, we might have distanced ourselves a bit, we might have had higher sanitation standards, we would have taken steps to minimize, but I don't think we'd have shut down. And Mike's comment was we would have figured out some sort of way to essentially herd immunize by giving low-grade versions of it to people to try to build up their resistance. And I'm not enough of a medical person to know. Another thought I had this week was there is a rush to authoritarianism across the world, again mimicking the Chinese, with the governments of the world essentially going to war against the disease. But I also think it's important to remember that authoritarian route showed itself in that it initially tried to cover it up. They may still be undercounting for all we know. I certainly don't know. And that authoritarian tendencies over any long period of time have generally not been very good for society. Having said that, just as the government steps forward and pays soldiers who are sent off to war, and they may not pay them their full market value when they draft them and send them to war, a la World War II, but they do pay them. And in that light, I view the unemployed, I view the companies that are shut down as the soldiers in an odd way being forced to go to war by government, and therefore the government should be supporting them. They are the victims of this war. Obviously, the front line are people working in groceries and people who are delivering and people who are working in the medical community. Another odd thought is that I had was that the hospitals are either jammed or empty. They're empty if they haven't had the corona swamp, and all they've really had is eliminating all of the elective surgery that would normally occur. And so you hear from some people that they're being laid off because they're not doing all the elective type of stuff, waiting for the attack to happen, if you will. Hopefully that attack never comes, but that's an odd situation. The research that's coming out that I've read seems to indicate that somewhere between 50 and 90% of all the people that seem to have had the virus are completely asymptomatic. And therefore, any data working on cases identified from those going to the hospital has a huge selection bias, which is always a challenge in statistics. Also, partly what's happening at the hospitals is that a whole bunch of people who would have died over the next 12 months are dying from this virus in a very short period of time. And so if the flow of people that you thought would come into a hospital over 12 months, and some of them never going to the hospital even, suddenly are swamped into the hospital in 2 months, that accounts for this skyrocketing death in these videos you see of how horrible it is in some ICU units. However, we also have to remind ourselves that many of those people were going to die, certainly by no means all. As I've read more about this and talked with people who know more about this, it is very tricky to categorize, did someone die of the flu, did someone die of coronavirus, etc. About the best they can say is, did they have it in their system at the time? But they may have died of heart problems or complications from diabetes or, and it's very therefore likely that some of the deaths that would normally have been attributed to complications from diabetes or heart or name it, cancer, whatever it might be, are being now categorized as associated with corona in a way that is accurate, I suspect, but not accurate. It's not like anybody's trying to lie, but the person was very severely complicated from pulmonary situations or respiratory situations already. They happen to get this and have it in their system and die at the time it gets categorized. I want to walk through, I know I'm prone to numbers, but I'm going to just go through a bunch of numbers, and we'll post this table on my site. You got to give me a little time to get it cleaned up, but I'm just going to read it to you. You don't have to jot the numbers down because we'll post it. But these are all related to the United States, and everything is rounded just to make it digestible. The United States has about 330 million people. It has about 2.8 million deaths a year. That amounts to about 234,000 deaths a month, or about 7,700 deaths per day from all causes. There are about 647,000 deaths annually associated with heart disease. That's about 54,000 deaths per month from heart disease, 54,000 per month. It's useful to have in mind that we've had less than 2,000 deaths total from corona in March, and heart alone would have been about 54,000. And in fact, we have typically almost 1,800 heart disease deaths per day in the United States. So it's important to keep some context. We had only probably about 0.8% of all the deaths that occurred in the United States are related to COVID. I'm not trying to minimize death is death, but when you put it in context of the total numbers of death, and by the way, even if that went up tenfold, you're still at a pretty small number compared to all the deaths that are occurring. And obviously we hope we get it under control, but some context I think is important. Next, on the economy. The U.S. economy, as I've noted before, is about $21 trillion as of the end of the first week of March. And we had about a 3.5% unemployment rate. And as I said, that meant we had about 156 million employed at the end of the first week in March, and just under 6 million unemployed, for a labor force of around 162 million. Now, to give you a sense of what the U.S. economy does, is that every month it generates about $404 billion in GDP. That amounts to about $57 billion a day of GDP. It amounts to about $134,000 annually in GDP per worker. Now, essentially what we've done is shut down about 40% of our economy. And it's not shut down. It's probably running at 10% of capacity. Some essential people have been kept on. On the other hand, in the 60%, quote, essential part of the economy, many people have been let go. So I'm going to just say that 90% of 40% of the economy is shut down. I don't know. We're not going to know these numbers for some time, but to me that passes a smell test. So that says that 36% of the economy is shut down. That means that each week we are sacrificing $145 billion in GDP. It means that we will ultimately lose about 56 million workers. That's about 36% of all workers. That says that if we lose 56 million workers, remember we started with 156 million workers the first week of March, we would end up with about 100 million people working and about 62 million people unemployed. I repeat that. If we shut down, the way we're doing, we will end up with a number of around 100 million working and about 60 million not working. That cannot be good if you want a stable, safe society. And while I'm not a gun person and so forth, you all know the data on increases in gun sales and bullet sales and so forth, and the issues that could happen. And I've said before that one of the scenarios I most worry about is some relatively trivial exercise in social unrest gets overreacted to, which causes a further overreaction, which causes another overreaction. And social unrest, once it happens, is very difficult to put back in the bottle. And so not only the human tragedy of the kind of unemployment that could set in, and remember, I think we could well already be in the range of 20 million unemployed in just a matter of 3 weeks, and it's only not at the full unemployed because there's a tail of how long can I hang on. But most companies only have a few weeks of cash available before they'll throw in the towel. By the way, talking about throwing in the towel, one of the things I think that's going to be most damaging, even from a relatively short shutdown, is a lot of baby boomers are in their, let's say, 60 to 70 years. They have a small business, a local hair salon, a local nail salon, a restaurant, etc. And they've been talking probably for a couple of years. You probably know such people of, when are we going to throw in the towel and quit? But business was good as of 3 weeks ago, so they were continuing to make hay while the sun shines. Well, I just have the feeling that a number of them are going to say, I don't need this. I don't need it. Even when the economy opens up, it's going to be tough going. I don't want to come out of pocket. I don't want to go through the brain damage. I don't want to go through the emotional of dealing with. I'm done. And you're going to see a higher proportion of businesses shutting than the financial strain itself if this lasts even another week longer, because by that point it'll have been a month. And I think you're just going to see a number just throw in the towel and go into retirement and tell their people to collect unemployment. To give you a sense of a couple of more numbers about the economy, if you continue this scenario, that is the 36% of the economy is lost, that's the $145 billion a week. That means in the 3 weeks that have occurred since we shut down the economy. Now, granted, not every place in the nation shut down as fully or as fast, so this is all back of the envelope to give you and me some sense. Probably in the last 3 weeks, we've lost something like $435 billion of GDP. That's gone. Now, some of it may be pent up. People who canceled vacations may take them later. It may not be, quote, lost forever, but that's 3 weeks of GDP. 36% of 3 weeks of GDP lost is $345 billion. That means that in March, GDP fell probably about 2%. That is, if this keeps up, we'll lose 36% of the economy over the year, but you didn't lose 36% in a day. Each day that goes by, we lose a bit more. So we've already, though, in 3 weeks, probably lost 2% of GDP. It's kind of staggering when you think about losing 2% of $21 trillion in 3 weeks. That takes effort. By the way, if this continues for 2 more weeks until mid-April, we would end up losing a total of about $725 billion of GDP versus the end of the first week of March. And we would be down about 3.5% of GDP versus about 5 weeks earlier. So we're losing about 70 basis points of GDP per week versus the first week of March. Now, some of this will be masked by the government spending, but real economic activity is what we're talking about. You can mask things, but it doesn't change the fact that the loss is staggering. A couple of other things is that 23% of the deaths that took place in March will basically be due to heart disease, and cancer would be right behind it, and other causes of death right behind it. About 0.8% of all the deaths that will take place in March are likely to be COVID when we look back. And again, I don't minimize it, but we've already given up 2% probably of GDP, and we've added probably 15 million people already to the unemployed to basically address 0.8% of all deaths, with people who know better than do I indicating that half of those deaths probably would have occurred anyway within the next 12 months. And in fact, some of them would have occurred in that month and been attributed to other causes. And it just seems to me that we are getting to the point soon where we need to start doing cost-benefit analysis. And I'll end on the same note that I said I had, which is we cannot have the luxury of assuming that there's some magic solution around the corner where we go get a shot or we take a pill and it's all wonderful. There are some interesting lines of research going on. Cleveland Clinic and Columbia University Medical and other places are doing test protocols on the hydrochloroquine and AZ treatment that the French did on 30 cases with very good results, but it was a very tiny sample. And hopefully in a matter of weeks, we'll know if that's a false lead or it's productive. There are many other people working on other things. But I think if we're going to be glued to our television screens and see the number of cases and see the number of deaths, that television screen should also be having the number of unemployed and lost GDP tally going up. We've added probably 15 million people to the unemployed ranks in 21 days. That's sort of 70,000 a day or more. I mean, we're adding staggering numbers of people, and you can do the math per hour. And if we had an update of that, and if we had an update also showing on the screen of GDP lost, I think you would have a very different tenor out there. Last thing I'd say is people say, what kind of recovery will it be? Nobody knows, because the question really is going to be, how long is the shutdown, which I certainly don't know as we're sitting here. I certainly believe the longer it goes, the more fundamental damage to the system occurs. If they'd have shut down for a day, I'm not saying that would have been productive, but if they'd have shut down for a day, I think it's fair to say it would have been a blip. It would have been a non-event. shutting down for 2 days starts affecting the system. And we've already shut down about 21 days. It looks like we're going to shut down several more weeks, maybe more. And it's not just us, obviously. It's a lot of places. One last thought I had this morning was I was listening how Prime Minister Boris Johnson has it, and it shows, and no one has ever. Come on, let's step back. There's been no shortage of national leaders in history who have had bad flus, have had respiratory infections, etc. over history. This just happens to be this one. And again, I'm not trying to minimize. The last thing I'd say is people say, yes, but you don't understand this is geometric. And I would say, yes, I actually understand geometric. I'm good in math. I can actually do geometric in my head. So I do get that it's potentially geometric up to a point. And I do understand that geometric has to have natural limits. It cannot be naturally geometric to forever, and it becomes self-limiting. And I don't think there's any great solution here, but I think there's a series of things that I just wanted to share. I don't claim to have the answers. I hope these help you think things through. I hope everybody's safe, and hope you stay that way. Until our next update in about a week.